main hospital systems up here in upstate really didn't believe in long COVID and still don't. To this day, they still don't. They don't want to admit that long COVID is really as big of a deal as it is. Especially if you're not coming directly out of ICU, they still don't want to admit that. And a lot of people might say that I'm being harsh, that the hospital systems are trying. Not up here, they're not. And I hope to encourage the change in that, because long COVID is very real. Even if you weren't like my husband in the ICU, almost you're pretty much on your deathbed, I can attest, because I have long COVID. And there's days that I can't even hardly function because I feel like I have COVID all over again.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, "I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours." We tell him bye and he leaves. And that was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner, and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
Telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them, because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today I'll be talking with Summer in South Carolina. This is a powerful episode about not only COVID loss, but long COVID. Summer's husband, Robert, was in the COVID ICU for 81 days, and then he was released to a rehab facility and came home in October 2020. And he was home for almost 18 months. But Robert and Summer struggled through his long COVID. They saw specialists and doctors who all told them to wait and see, and so they did. Robert died on March 22, 2022, in their home of a massive heart attack brought on by complications of long COVID. As Summer says, God gave her husband back to her only to lose him to long COVID. For context, we recorded this episode on August 17th, 2022. Summer advocates for LongHaul with COVID Survivors for Change. She is part of the Yellow Heart Memorial LongHaul Advocacy, and she is a powerful storyteller. Her husband told her to keep telling his story, and she has. They have been featured on Fox News, ABC News, and many other news outlets. Many of those links are in the show notes below. Lastly, we do talk about detailed medical procedures, and suicide is mentioned in this episode. Know that this may be triggering for some. And with that, I'd like to welcome Summer to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And today we're talking about your husband.
Yes.
And he passed away in March of 2022 from long COVID complications and had COVID in the summer of 2020.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And where do you live?
We're in Seneca, South Carolina. That's close to Clemson, closer to the Georgia border.
All right. So where I want to start is where I start with a lot of people, and that is March of 2020. And if you just want to briefly talk about how you and your family first heard about COVID and the changes that you made and changes at your job and your husband's job and your daughter's school, those kinds of things.
Early on in the pandemic, when I guess you could say the U.S. started first hearing about COVID, obviously our hearts went out to the other countries that were already being highly impacted and everything like that. And then when it started hitting places like New York and everything, obviously we kept a very close eye on it, listening to the news almost daily, watching it spread through the major cities and everything. At the time, I was doing a virtual job, data entry, and I'm still actually doing that job. And my daughter was homeschooling only because she's immune compromised with a rare immune disorder. And at first, just like our neighbors and everybody else here in South Carolina, we didn't know if it was just going to be something that was, COVID was going to be something that was fleeting, something that only affected certain parts of the country, we were thinking maybe places with major, international travel and stuff like that. So we went about our daily lives, not thinking nothing of it, and just, still kept an eye on it. And I believe it was March of that year, we ended up going to Atlanta for just a little day trip down to the aquariums. And of course, if anybody's been to Atlanta, there's a lot of international travelers and everything like that. And within a week, maybe less than a week of us traveling down there, Atlanta got hit. And we were like, oh goodness, we were just there. We know we were up against a bunch of international travelers because we were going to a lot of touristy areas. And we just, by that time, of course, the CDC was coming out with all kinds of warnings and what to do, what not to do, the generalized, symptom lists and stuff like that. And with our daughter being immune compromised, of course, we were very, aware of what her body does with infection. And shortly after that, Charleston got hit. And that's when my heart sank, of course, because we knew it would just be a matter of time before the upstate, which is the Greenville, Spartanburg, and our area of South Carolina. And we just waited and, it was just a wait and see kind of thing of like how quickly it spread through the state. And of course, we were watching the Georgia area since we're so close to Georgia and stuff too. And we were lucky for a long time. We were like, okay, again, our hearts, we're going out to the people that in the states and, in the countries that were highly affected. And move on to June of that year. South Carolina slowly started opening certain things back up. Like a lot of the state parks opened up for visitation, different outdoor things, you were starting to be able to do. And, during this time we were doing the, either early morning pickup, where we can go in with our daughter, where they only let the elderly come into Walmart and stuff like that. Or we were doing, the online ordering that everybody was doing.
And if I could just interrupt, what was your husband doing? Did they make changes at his job?
Oh, no, they didn't.
Oh,
They did. He worked, they had basically two locations. He worked in the smaller of the two locations, which was his location was about 30 minutes from us. And neither location, even up until that point, had a mask mandate put down by the corporation. Every now and then we would hear somebody getting sick, but nobody confirmed or denied if it was COVID or not. His location, nobody really got sick.
okay.
And this is, like I said, about June.
Yeah.
Of 2020. In his industry, he was classified. They were classified as shipping and receiving. They manufactured all sorts of things that goes up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and so they were getting a lot of truckers that would come into both locations from places like Atlanta, Charlotte, of course Charleston, with the ports being down there and stuff like that. And none of the truckers were required to wear a mask. And they would come in telling the horror stories of different businesses that were slammed with COVID and still no mask.
And they didn't have any kind of checks or anything at all that they were doing to
No.
Nothing at all.
No testing, no nothing. They encouraged anybody that thought that they were around COVID people to be tested. If anybody set out of work for whatever, the reason might have been, they had to bring back, every now and then, they would have to bring back a doctor's note saying, yes, this person's free of COVID. But like a lot of places, were doing, testing as you come in the door. These people weren't. There was no requirement. And then at one point, I think they did say mask optional. Once our area started getting hit pretty bad, they went to mask optional. Because a lot of times my daughter and I, we would go meet him for lunch or like bring him lunch. They stopped allowing us to even do that. They said no outside strangers, but yet the truckers were still able to come in without masks.
Mm.
So that's about June of 2020 that I'm up to now. So.
Okay. And that's when your husband got COVID?
No, we actually went through most of June, all the way to the end of June of 2020 before he contracted COVID, along with about 3 other people at the larger location. And that was the first experience they had personally with, people that they knew inside their corporation that contract COVID.
Yeah. And so what happened after that, when you found out that he had COVID?
Well, I remember really like it was yesterday, it was last Monday in June of that year. He went to work. We spent a really good weekend with no signs or symptoms of any of us being sick. Definitely nothing to make us think COVID was, in our presence or anything. He got up early. He did our normal morning routine. He said goodbye. And within, I think, a couple of hours of him being at work, he called me and said, I'm just so sick. He had another employee back there helping him because he just couldn't hardly sit up. He was throwing up. He was just feeling really bad. And he goes, and I said, well, just come home. And there was this one route that he would always take. And I said, don't go off that route, just in case I need to come get you. Just come home. and I said, I'll be waiting for you. And honestly, even with how badly infected our county was and the county that he was in was infected, I just didn't think COVID. Because, back then, the symptoms list was changing, daily almost. And just what he was saying just didn't sound like COVID, like what the news was reporting at the time. And finally, he came home. Like I said, it was about a 30-minute drive or so, depending on what time of day. When he pulled up, I told my daughter, I said, don't come out. I said, just in case it ends up being COVID, don't come out. And I opened I could tell that he was just sitting in the car. And so I go out and I open the door and he almost falls out of the car.
Mm.
And of course, he's taller than me, bigger than me. And so I try to hold him up and I get him to bed. And I ended up talking him into going to a rapid access clinic. And they don't even test him for COVID, like the nasal swabs. They don't test him for COVID. They just do a chest x-ray. And they go, oh, well, we're going to give you this Z-Pack and some steroids and send you home because your lungs don't look like COVID.
Mm.
And so, like I said, that was the last Monday of June. And we were lucky because we had like O2 oxygen meters at home. And they go, well, if this Z-Pack, if you don't feel any improvement with this Z-Pack, call your primary care. Just like a normal, in and out kind of thing. And so we go home, we put him back to bed, all that. And like a day or two later, we call his primary care and do a virtual visit, because by this time they're all stressing virtual visits and stuff. And the doctor's telling him, well, if your oxygen gets down below this number, go to the ER, no question, or call an ambulance. It's getting closer to the July 4th by this time. Can't remember exactly what day it is. His O2's numbers go from like 95 to 90. And then they start dropping into the high 80s. And he's talking as normal as he can. But then he starts not being able to smell anything, not being able to taste anything. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even have to have a COVID test to know you have COVID.
Yeah.
And we isolate him in his, in our bedroom, and I'm sleeping on the couch. And my daughter Jessica's not, I'm like, Jess, you just stand in the hallway and say goodbye, like goodnight to him and stuff like that. Don't go in. And I'm masking up as I take care of him. I remember, I think it was a day or so before July 4th. He's just not, of course, he's getting worse. And where he's still at home because his doctors are telling him he can stay at home as long as his oxygen is at a certain point. It's been a few, like 4 days, I think, since the first visit to the doctor, since he first got sick. And his O2s drop into the 70s. By this time, he's like, I'm not going to the doctor. And he's a stubborn person, doesn't like nobody making a fuss over him. He's like, I'm not going to the doctor. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to the ER. No, I'm not. I don't got COVID. I'll be fine. I'm like, and I'm screaming at him, showing him his oxygen levels. And I'm like, they said you could die if it gets this low.
Yeah.
And I said, either you're going to let me drive you, or I'm calling the ambulance. And I said, you're going. I said, you could be mad at me all you want. And so finally, and this is us yelling at each other, arguing. Finally, he goes, fine, you could take me. And we go into a neighboring town in Anderson because he refuses to go to the one that's around the corner to the hospital. And there was this rule in all our hospitals here that says if you have COVID symptoms, you need to call this number. And so I called the number and I said, my husband has COVID symptoms. I'm pulling up now. And they wouldn't let me come in. He goes, well, just go home and I'll be out in a couple of hours, because you know how long ERs take. And I'm like, and I didn't want to leave him. Some just told me not to leave, and I'm sitting out in the parking lot, don't know what to do,
Mm-hmm.
He has all he takes in was his phone and his phone cord. And obviously I knew it would take a while for them to even really get to him. And I ended up going home. And by this time, the drive to that hospital is about 45 minutes from here. And he calls me and says, well, they're putting me in ICU because they can't get my oxygen up. And he's talking to me normal. Little do I know, later I'm going to find out that this whole time he does not remember anything. He does not remember the drive home that day. He does not remember any of the conversations we had. He doesn't remember going to the doctor the day that he got sick. He doesn't remember anything. That's how sick he was.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many days it was from the time they finally get him up to the, because getting to bed, by that time is really hard up in ICU. And he texts me or messages me on Facebook saying, well, I finally got a room. I'm up in ICU. The nurses or whoever's going to call you, let you know like how to get a hold of me or how to get a hold of them or whatever, because they have, like codes and different things that you have to have and all that. And I think it was the next day he calls and says, well, they're going to try plasma. See if that will help. And I'm not kidding you. It seemed like it was, I don't even think it was a full 24 hours after they tried the plasma, because he calls me asking me what my opinion is on the treatment. And I told him, I said, hon, I don't know. I said, I've heard all sorts of things.
Yeah.
I said, just make sure you listen when they tell you about it, because they're not telling me hardly anything. I mean, that by this time, because he's awake and they want to treat, a patient, like let them make the decision. But little do they know he's completely out of his mind and he doesn't remember nothing he's being told, And so they give him the plasma, and I think it was maybe less than 24 hours. Early in the morning, I remember, probably about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I hear my phone go off. And it's that FaceTime thing coming in, and I'm like, oh no. I answer it, and it's him. And he's refusing to turn the video on, and he's crying. And he goes, hon, I just want to let you know that I love you both. And I don't know what I would ever do without you. And they're putting me on a ventilator. And I'm like, what? Because of course, I hadn't heard nothing from the doctors, no nothing, no updates. And I'm like, what do you mean they're putting you on a ventilator? And he goes, just know I love you, hon. I have to go. And it was less, and I remember seeing the little time on the Facebook thing and when he hangs up. And, of course, I tell him I love him. And I said, I tell him, I said, just know we're here for you. Fight for us. And he hangs up, and it was less than a minute. All this is said really quickly. And I just start crying. And a little while later, his nurse for that day calls and says he went on a ventilator fine, no complications. This is what's going to happen from now on. He says he can't be the one to make a decision. And that was the beginning, really the beginning of the 81 days that he was in the ICU. And my daughter and I got to calling it living life on pause, because we felt stuck, because it was like every day we would get an update, from a stranger.
Yeah.
If we didn't hear, we finally realized if we didn't hear nothing overnight, that was a good thing, because that means he survived the night. And during those 81 days, we couldn't go see him, obviously. He was on and off ventilators 4 different times. And every time that he was pulled off, he would suffer something called ICU delirium. And later he remembered it, but he didn't realize what was happening, like why he was experiencing the things that he was experiencing, but it was because of that. I find out that ICU delirium consists of like hallucinations, horrific nightmares, and different things like that, where the person's definitely not in their right mind. And every time he would get off of it, he would try and call us, and he would be saying just all kinds of things. Would of course get so worked up that his oxygen would drop, and he would have complications, and he would have to be put right back on. And of course, when he first went in, I forgot to tell you this, he went in not only with COVID, but he went in with COVID pneumonia. Then during this time, when he was on the ventilators and stuff, he had to have a feeding tube. Started out the traditional way, I guess you could say, up the nose, and stuff. And then he would, every time he would come off, he would fight it, fight all the tubing and fight the nurses and stuff, because he was just so sick. And of course, he was having all those delusions that he thought that they were doing. He later said he thought that they were demons, and he thought that they were threatening me and Jesse. And so he was trying to fight to save us. And in turn, he, of course, hurt himself, not realizing that he was actually, none of that was actually happening. And yeah, ended up, they had to move the feeding tube into his side. And he also suffered a collapsed lung. He aspirated over and over again, which caused a different kind of pneumonia. And then by this time, it was the week of my 40th birthday, which is in the middle of July. And my mom, and during all this, by the way, I was fighting COVID too, because I contracted it from him.
Oh.
And my daughter also contracted COVID. But luckily for us, she hardly experienced anything. And on top of the stress of having to deal with, hearing from strangers what was happening and what not happening with him, I spent a lot of my nights in the floor of my bathroom begging God not to let me end up beside him. And of course, praying for him too. And when I was finally cleared as not contagious, my mom risked her health to come all the way from Arkansas to be with us. And like a day or two after my birthday, we get this FaceTime call, and it was a chaplain telling us that he was being resuscitated because something happened to his heart. And they still, at the time of his release, they still didn't understand what happened. And it was the second time they had to do that. They didn't bother to call us on the first time. And these two times happened within a couple of hours of each other. And we can hear all the alarms going off, the doctor's orders being screamed, and they refused to let us see him. Refused to let us come up. Refused to let us see him on FaceTime. And that's how I spent my 40th. Instead of traveling with him to someplace safe, I was in the hallway crying. But then somehow, by the end of August, he just took this turning point. I don't know what they did, what they didn't do, what happened, but he took this turning point because they finally started talking about rehab. And he took this turning point where he was holding his own. His numbers, everything that they looked at, he was just doing really good. And by this time, he had the fourth ventilator. This time it was in the neck, because they just couldn't keep the one in his throat anymore due to medical issues and stuff.
Yeah.
And he just was in there so long that he just couldn't tolerate that one anymore. And they were telling me, they go, well, this is what's going to happen when we find a rehab. We're going to have to jump on it immediately because everybody in the state is just needing one. There's so many people that's in this position that needs rehab that when we find it, we're going to have to send him wherever we can find it. And they were first talking about sending him all the way to Charleston, which is, way down by the coast, over 4 hours away. And I said, you know what? I said, you send him wherever you need to send him.
Yeah.
I said, you jump on it, and I'll make it work. All of a sudden one day, towards the end of August, beginning of September, they say, we got a spot. It's in Greenville, which is just maybe an hour drive from here. And I said, we're moving him today. And I said, well, is there any way I could see him? Because by this time they tested him and he was COVID negative. And I'm like, is there any way at least I could see him from a distance? And they go, yeah. Okay. But we aren't sure what time he's going to be leaving by ambulance. We don't know any of it. And so my daughter and I, we sit out there outside the hospital watching all sorts of ambulances. I don't think I've ever seen that many ambulances in one location ever, bringing people in, taking people out, all kinds of stuff. And we watch every ambulance to see if we see him being rolled out. And the staff told the ambulance driver and people that we were out there and that we just wanted to see him from a distance. And all of a sudden, this hours and hours later, I think we probably sat out there a good 8 hours at least waiting. And just for a chance to see him.
Yeah.
And these two ambulances, people come rolling this person to this ambulance that's literally sitting right in front of our car. And I'm like, Jess, oh my gosh, it's him. It's him. And he still has the ventilator in the neck, and they have him sort of not knocked out, but sort of sedated to where he's sort of relaxed for the trip over, to where he wouldn't, have any complications, hopefully. And I just start crying.
Yeah.
And they stop, and one guy's getting their doors open, doing whatever they're doing, and the woman is at his head, and she looks over, and I'm like, and I wave, and I go, kind of emotion that he's ours, and she bends down and whispers to him, and he slowly turns his head and turns it back, and I'm like, and I didn't expect them to allow us to come up, and they motion, they were like, come on, And we mask up, and I try to keep our distance because I sure didn't want to make him sick or anything. And I introduce us, and they go, you get over here. We know how long you've been waiting to hold his hand. And I kissed his hand, and I said, hi. I said, it's me and Jess. I said, you've done so good. I said, you keep fighting for us, okay? I said, because we're fighting for you. I said, you keep holding on. I said, you could do this. And he, of course, couldn't say anything, because he's been on a ventilator for too long, and he just starts crying. And I could tell he lost massive amounts of weight, and he still looked at himself in the face and everything. And I kiss him, and I tell the drivers, I said, you take good care of him, and they go, well, we have to go. And I said, I'll see you soon, hon. I love you. And Jess was just crying and patted him on his shoulder and told him that she loved him. And he went off to rehab. And that was the best day, one of the best days that we had.
Yeah.
I mean, it was sad seeing him that way, but I was like, finally, I'm like, finally. And he spent another 2 or 3 weeks in rehab, and I didn't know whether or not, I was going to be able to come up and see him or not. And a couple of days after he got admitted, up there in Greenville, they called and said, yeah, you could come on up, but your daughter can't, because they were real strict, on the visitation. I'm like, are you kidding? I said, really? I could come up? And I'm like, yeah, come on. And I said, well, don't tell him. I said, don't tell him that I'm coming. I said, I wanted to be a surprise. And I still expected to see him on a ventilator, all hooked up and stuff like that. I come in with a bunch of balloons and I knock on the door, and he's laying on his side because he suffered a lot of bed sores while he was in there. So they were trying to heal that up too. And he was facing away from me, and I knock on the door and he turns sort of over like, who is it now kind of look, and he was off the ventilator.
Wow.
I mean, he still had the tube in his neck, and they said that they kept it there because it was a just in case thing until he got stronger. And I remember the smile. He was so happy, and he started crying, and he was talking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're talking. And I actually have a picture of the time that I went to see him, the first time we were in the same room together, of us holding hands. It was almost like, I don't know how to even explain it, like seeing a best friend for the first time in years. You just tell him everything, you just spill everything. And I told him everything that happened, and just talking to him and just encouraging him. And of course, we only had a limited amount of time, visitors could stay. And he would beg me not to leave every time. And I drove over and over and over again for 2.5 weeks to come see him every day. And every day he was stronger. He would do better, and he was doing therapy, and they took the tubing out and when his oxygen was good, and he would just every day he would beg me not to go. And that's when he started telling me about the night terrors and him thinking the nurses were demons. And I said, you don't know how lucky you are to be here, because there's other people that I knew that lost people a lot quicker. It was there a week or two and died. I said, you got no clue how lucky you are. And he would FaceTime with our daughter, and just talk to her. And her birthday's in October, and when we finally found out when he was going to be able to be released, he goes, don't tell her. He goes, I want to surprise her. I'm like, okay. I said, that'll be fun. And he kept going, don't worry, I'll be home before your birthday. I promise. I'm gonna work hard and get home before your birthday. And the day that he got released, we were driving through a town sort of that's in between here and there, and he sees a Sonic, and he goes, hun, I know this is silly, but can I please have a hamburger?
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, hun, I said, I will get you anything in this entire world that you want.
Yeah.
I said, I don't care. And so we pull over and we sit in Sonic drive-through and just talk and cry. And that was by far one of the best days that we had. And he would like the whole way home, even before the Sonic stop, he would tell me about how there was so many times in the hospital that he thought he was thinking that he was awake, and he thought he was already at home. And he goes, and then he would wake up and he would see the nurses. And he goes, he would squeeze my hand like a little child would a mom. He goes, hon, please tell me you're real. Please tell me that I'm actually going home. And I say, I promise, I'm real. Promise we're going home. You're in the car. I said, We can get through anything. I said, we can do it. I said, I promise you, all of this is real. And for months after that, after he got home, he would wake up screaming sometimes from the night terrors, thinking he was back in the hospital.
Yeah. Do you think on the day that he was in the ambulance and you came to see him, did he remember that?
I don't think so. I don't think I think he was so kind of out of it because of the sedation that I believe that he maybe have remembered it a little bit, but not too much. I think he probably thought that it was one of those hallucinations, thinking that I was there, but not want to accept it.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Yeah. And well, anyway, of course, when he got home, we had home health for a little while because of his wounds and his oxygen. He went home with oxygen. Couldn't do, the simple tasks. Like he had to relearn how to cut up his own food, do simple tasks. He could barely walk. He had to use a walker and a cane for a long time because he just had no strength. And he couldn't even stand up in the shower either. I had to like hold him and like wash him and take care of him and everything. And trust me, I was more than happy to do it. I couldn't get enough of like being next to him or just talking to him or spending time with him. I was just like soaking that up, because I was just so grateful, that he didn't pass away.
Yeah.
And that was a long, long process. And when he was finally ready to get out, and by this time, of course, my daughter and I, we were still doing like, when we needed it, we were still doing like the Walmart pickups. And, if we absolutely had to go in, we were doing, the early morning stuff. But really, we didn't really get out much those first few months. And when he was ready to get out, finally he was just like, I got to get out of this house.
Yeah.
He's like, I just want to go see something, I think he just wanted to soak it all in, just being out of the hospital. And we would go for drives, just stay away from people. And like, and we did go see quite a few specialists and his doctor and stuff like that. And every last one of them was like, do you remember me? I was on your care team. And he was like, nope, I don't remember nobody.
Wow.
And they told him stories of what it was like on the ICU floor. He said that their ICU had basically a list of people that they compared. I don't know what they looked at to make this list, but they said that there was people on it every day that they watched more heavily than others because they figured by what their stats were showing and everything like that, that they weren't going to make it through the day.
Oh.
And they said, we cannot believe you were here because you were on the list to not make it more than you were off of it.
Wow.
And that was the same over and over and over again. Every specialist, every doctor we saw as follow-ups, that was the same story. You were on the list to die more than you were on it to live. And they, even as pulmonologists, they had nurses coming in being like, we were there with you. We were there with you. We prayed over you and cheered you on. And yeah, even a lot of the nurses I talked to, I never met them. At least I don't believe I've ever met them. They go, your husband's so stubborn. And he's a fighter in more ways than one, I guess, wrestled him down and stuff like that. And, I said, please don't take anything he might do or say personally. And they go, we don't. And there was this one nurse, and I'm assuming it's the same one he ended up not liking too much. She goes, I'm an old school nurse. She goes, I pray over all my patients. She goes, I'm there she goes, I like your husband. She goes, I could tell he's a fighter. And every day that I had her, I ended up loving her. she was fantastic because she knew not to take anything he did or said personally, but she made, like, when they would try to wean him off to see how well he would do, he never wanted to do what they said, like get up, or like they would try to even set him up or move him around a little bit. And she goes, I'm not taking that. I said, good. I said, don't. I said, you make him listen to you. And anyway, there were so many of those nurses that would come and talk to us and be like, we can't believe you're here, and when I would listen to that, they all called him a miracle.
Yeah. That is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah. We got to have him for Christmas that year. Something I wasn't even sure we were going to have, because of how back and forth he was. And let me back up just a minute before I tell you about Christmas. October is also our anniversary. Time we got married and everything. And he told me, he goes, when he was still in rehab, he goes, I know you've been wanting to renew our vows for a long time. He goes, I don't care what I got to do. We're going to renew our vows this year. And it just so happened 2020 was our 10-year wedding anniversary. And he goes, I'm walking down the aisle to you without oxygen. I want to be that good. And he goes, but don't worry, I'll take my oxygen just in case. And this little chapel not too far from us, it looks like one of those vintage, old-timey kind of chapels that you see in country movies, with the steeple, and it was painted white on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just absolutely beautiful inside, stained glass and everything. And this lady pastor stepped up when she heard our story and what we were wanting to do, and she goes, absolutely, come on. And I cried all the way through it, but we renewed our vows that year. And when it got to, for better or worse, is sickness and in health, to this day, I believe we are an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely have lived our vows, and and I'm so glad we got to do the 10-year wedding vow renewal, especially after everything that we had gone through. And during this time, there was different people throughout the community that really stepped up to support us and everything. And also in Christmas, we actually had, how like different towns have come meet Santa and stuff like that.
Yeah.
An organization actually helped get Santa to our door. And we have a picture that this fantastic Santa, a local Santa, came dressed up and everything. And he was masked, he had a, face shield over, and his assistant came and spent a little bit of time with us. And, we have a picture of that. That was his, the Christmas that he came home, and I tried to make it as good as I could for him, because he had just been through too much and everything. During this whole time, also, I wasn't working. All we were getting was really just a little bit of short-term disability through his work, and that equaled up to maybe $300 a week. And so a lot of community members, stepped up to support Jess and I with like food and different, essentials. And one day we came home and had this big pile of Amazon boxes outside of our door. And I was like, and it was as tall as my daughter. And we got to laughing. And this was when he was still in the hospital. And she goes, oh my gosh, it's just like Christmas. And they included little notes inside, and it was just people we didn't know, that wanted to stand by us and everything. And that's something I'll always be grateful for, is that so many strangers stood up for us when we didn't, when we didn't have anybody.
Yeah.
And anyway, back to his story. He knew he was the kind of guy that was raised, a man provides for the family. The man, if the woman can stay home if she wants to, then then she needs to. And he was raring to go back to work, and everything like that. And I was traumatized. I didn't want to go back to work. And he got the okay to go back. And I think it was early 2021, or not 2021. Yeah, 2021. And I'm like, oh my gosh, please don't go back. Don't go back. Please don't. And I'm like, just don't. File for disability. Do something. I said, if anybody deserves disability, it's you. And his lungs by this time, early 2021, was both at about 50% capacity. Couldn't walk through Walmart without having to have one of those wheelchairs. Couldn't hardly do simple tasks around the house without getting really winded. And of course, he was still on oxygen, by the way. His wounds had been healed up by this time, thanks to some awesome home health people. And he was just like, but I want to go back to work. You know how I am. I want to provide for y'all. I shouldn't. And he had harbored such guilt from contracting COVID and being gone that long. I'm like, hun, I said, I got you. I said, you let me take care of you. And he just wouldn't listen. And he got the okay from the doctor. Me and him worked out sort of like a deal, I guess you could say, of that he would try and take it as easy as he could. And he went back to the same small location that he contracted COVID from. And his boss over there made an agreement that he would have help, and stuff like that. And during this time, by the way, at the larger location, multiple people had died from COVID, caught it about the same time he did. They finally, after these people died and he was on his deathbed, they finally enacted a mask mandate, by the way. Anyway, he goes back to work with help and struggles every day, would call me with setbacks. And some of his long hauler symptoms were, obviously still needing oxygen, brain fog very, very badly. He was diagnosed with PTSD from all the, trauma that he sustained, with the nightmares and everything like that. Just a lot of physical limitations on top of the, the shortness of breath from all the lung damage. There would be, I guess you could say, flares of as if he would get sick with COVID all over again, but he would test negative. Where he would throw up and just, he would have panic attacks, all sorts of stuff. Of course, by this time, we were still seeing all the specialists, on a routine basis, which included basically anybody you could possibly see. Every single one of them were saying, nothing we could do, wait and see. This is your new normal. You need to accept it.
Oh.
Literally, the words "wait and see" kept coming out of their mouths, and he would know that I would get frustrated and get angry. And I'm like, give me a break. You could at least treat the symptoms. If you don't know how to treat whatever is going on with him, treat the symptoms. Because the whole time he was in the ICU, the doctors would even call me sometimes to say, we don't know how to treat COVID. We're just treating whatever pops up at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was begging them to at least do that, at least give him some form of comfort, to treat something, and they were like, what do you expect us to do? We don't have no treatment. We don't know what to do. We're going to wait and see if you improve on your own. And he did multiple rounds of, I guess you could say, pulmonary function tests, and nothing improved, over and over and over again. Blood work was off. Nothing was done, over and over again. All these flares kept happening. And he went through that all of last year, and nothing improved. And little by little, he did get his ability to somewhat walk through, let's say, Walmart back a little bit, but he would pay dearly for it afterwards, where he would have to go to bed or have to lay down on the couch or, something like that, where that was his one thing that he could do that day. After that, he could not do anything else.
Was it like that with his work too? Like when he went to work, he would come back and just be completely wiped out?
Yeah, there would be times that he would, like, even before he contracted COVID, every day before he would leave, he would call me and just chat, say, well, I'm on my way home, I'll be there, soon, blah, 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 I love you, kind of thing. And he would call me off and on throughout the day after he went back to work. And he would say, I just don't know how much longer I could do this. He goes, I can't even walk. In this warehouse that he worked in at the time was, fairly small, and so he couldn't even walk from one end to the other without having to stop, without having to sit down or feeling dizzy, lightheaded, stuff like that. And he would pay dearly during the week for that. And so he would try to park as close to his office as he could. And even with that, it was still just taking too much out of him. Anyway, so last year was really rough, emotionally, physically on him and me. And he slowly started realizing that just something went right, like just towards the end of the year, we started seeing a change in his mood. Because I think he was starting to sort of realize that was his new normal, and then also getting frustrated with doctors because doctors wasn't doing anything to help relieve any of the symptoms. And he was getting so put out with doctors and going to doctor's appointments that he literally didn't see use because, even I wouldn't see use if doctor wouldn't do anything for you.
Well, yeah, they're supposed to help. And
Exactly.
if you're seeing them over and over again and they're not helping, then it would be so frustrating.
Yeah. And we kept getting told, by people, well, just go find another doctor. Well, we were seeing some of the top people in the upstate. And so there was really nobody else to see. And, the two hospital systems up here in the two main hospital, basically three main hospital systems up here in upstate, really didn't believe in long COVID and still don't. To this day, they still don't. They don't want to admit that long COVID is really as big of a deal as it is. Especially if you're not coming directly out of ICU, they still don't want to admit that. And a lot of people might say that I'm being harsh, that the hospital systems are trying. Not up here, they're not. And I hope to encourage the change in that, because long COVID is very real. Even if you weren't like my husband in the ICU, almost you're pretty much on your deathbed, I can attest because I have long COVID. And there's days that I can't even hardly function because I feel like I have COVID all over again. So I could attest that even people that had a mild case of it can be in danger of ending up like my husband.
Yeah. Can I ask really quickly, did he ever get a long COVID diagnosis from any doctor?
His pulmonologist, earlier this year before he passed, we saw her again. I don't know if it was ever actually in his medical records, but she did admit finally of long COVID. I just don't know if it ever ended up in the medical records.
Okay.
But she finally did admit the words long COVID, so it took him almost 2 years to even mention the phrase long COVID. But like I said, last year I kept encouraging him to just quit his job, but he wouldn't do it because he still had it in his brain that he had to make up for what he put us through, in his words. And by that time I was going back to work, especially towards the end of last year. I was going back to work to try and encourage him to quit. And I became a CNA. And started working really long hours and stuff like that, trying to encourage him and show him that he did not have to work. And this is, of course, toward the end of last year. And I'm like, and I was trying to, we were looking into disability. But of course, a lot of long haulers I talked to across the country were having a lot of issues getting approved for it, and or getting doctors to sign off on them even being long haulers. And a lot of their stories sounded a lot like ours, being very disillusioned with the medical system, with doctors and stuff like that, and with other people, like family members, even denying long COVID. And so he was very on the fence about what to do, towards the end of last year. And anyway, there was talk starting up with his work about consolidating into their Anderson, South Carolina branch, close to the airport. And he was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can go over there, because I'm going to give you a sort of a picture of how he described it.
Okay.
They added, during the time that he was in the hospital, they actually made news about bragging about, I think it was $9 million or more dollars being invested in this expansion. And so they expanded, and with the old side plus the new side, I would say it's at least 4 to 5 football fields long.
Oh.
And he was going to be on the far side, in the new side. And they made everybody, I can't remember if it was right before or right after Christmas. They made everybody that was coming over there, including him, knowing, and by the way, they knew what all he's been going through this entire time, knew how much he struggled with walking, and stuff like that. They made him, along with quite a few others, come over there for a tour. And I'm like, oh God. And I knew he was going to pay dearly. And I said, you've been over there before. Can you tell your boss that, what's going on? And he goes, let me just go over there and see what they have to say. And sure enough, he couldn't make it. And I'm like, oh goodness, and I think this was in January, at the beginning of January of 2022. And I'm like, I said, you're going to have to make a decision. I said, we both know you can't do it. I said, I'm working. I said, please let me take care of you. And by this time I was working in the hospital right around the corner on what ended up being a COVID ward. Medical surgical ends up being a COVID ward. And of course, I was having panic attacks every time I had to walk into a room. And anyway, I said, please let me take care of you. Just quit. Just tell them, or at least I said, okay. And he goes, I don't want to quit. I said, well, okay, fine. At least ask for accommodations.
Yeah.
I said, ask for just closer parking, because there was a little spot we found one day when nobody was working that he could have parked that was really close to where he was going to be working. I said, ask to park over there, ask to keep oxygen in your office. I said, and ask for another assistant like they had over at the smaller place. I said, that's reasonable.
Yeah.
I said, surely after everything you've gone through and after how hard you struggled to get through last year, I said, surely they'll let you have that. And he goes, okay. He goes, I agree. And finally get him to agree. He is so stubborn. And he takes his boss that was going to still be over him and says, after he goes, it was the same day they had the tour. He goes, Brad, after today, he goes, I need this, and this. And because you know how bad my health is. I said, please, and he goes, please give it, please do this for me. And his response, and by the way, he's been at this company for quite a few years. Brad's response was, if you press for accommodations, you have no place here.
Oh.
And the other, there was one guy above him named Michael that also agreed. Robert presses for accommodations. He has no place.
Mm.
And so he goes, Brad, I said, he goes, I've been with y'all for a long time. You know what I've gone through. And Brad was like, are you sure you want to press for accommodations? And he goes, I have to have them. He goes, you're now no longer employed with them.
Wow.
And I said, when I read the text and messages, I said, don't worry about it. I said, I got you. I said, I cannot, and I honestly did not believe that they would actually fire him, but they did. Of course, he got really depressed about that, because he didn't think that they would do it. And he took a few weeks off, just rested and stuff like that. And he tried to go back to work with one of the hospitals right around, doing something, what he thought he could handle. And he didn't even last a day. His long COVID flared up. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, I got you. I'm making enough money for us to pay our bills. And I said, I'm good. And he goes, but you shouldn't have to take care of me. I said, but isn't that what a marriage is about? Taking care of each other. I said, let me do this. That was February, I guess, of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so he saw his cardiologist, pulmonology, and regular doctor early part of this year. Every last one of them signed off as nothing new, nothing that they could do, still the wait and see. By this time, one lung gained about 10% more. So one was still at 50%, one went up to 60% lung capacity. We started notice, even he noticed, the few weeks leading up to March of this year, something just wasn't right with him. Something about his health was just changing, and it was changing fast. Something was wrong, like really wrong. He was more fatigued than he would normally be. The flares was happening closer and closer together. Nobody, of course, in the medical community was listening. He would stay home a lot more and everything like that. And anyway, literally a week before he died, I was at work, and he messaged me saying that he was going to drop our daughter off somewhere, and but he was experiencing a lot of pain. Like he goes, I'm just hurting really, really bad. But it wasn't like the normal left arm pain and chest pain, it was the right arm and everything. And I said, well, if it keeps hurting, I said, go up there to the ER.
Yeah.
I said, you don't need to sit in pain. I said, go up there to ER, take it seriously, because you never know. Of course, ERs take forever. And I said, you keep me, and I was actually working upstairs. I said, when I get off, if you're still there, I'll come down and see you. And I sat there with him, he was still there. So I went and sat there with him and stuff like that. And they admitted him to the cardiac ward, just to rule out heart issues. And stayed up there like a day or two, because it was real late when he got admitted. They did a stress test with one of those ultrasounds, said everything's fine. Blood work was abnormal, like really abnormal. They gave him something in IV, didn't fix it. They released him, said, well, here you go, see ya. 2 cardiologists told him that.
Mm.
Didn't call in pulmonology, didn't call in nothing, didn't bother to do any more research on like why he was feeling like this. Didn't rule out blood clots in the lungs, didn't rule out nothing. Went home, he goes, see, I told you they wouldn't do nothing. This is why I don't like going to doctors now, because they never listen.
Yeah.
That whole last week was really good. I would go to work, come home, and I was actually about to start a new job. The day he died, I actually went to orientation, so orientation didn't last very long, thank goodness. I think it was the next day or a day or two after, I was going to start working in the ER as one of those people that come by and ask you for your insurance,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was excited, because it's definitely right up my alley. I loved working as a CNA in the ER whenever I was down there, and I love the sort of the environment, the fast pacedness, I guess, of it. And so I was excited not to do CNA work anymore and to get into more administration. And I come home that day, the day that he died, and everybody was just in a really good mood. And he was in a good mood. I mean, he was worn out. I don't know what in the world he did, but he was worn out, and he was just goofy, and he was just crazy. He was so funny. And he was sitting in his chair, and we all were just joking around with each other, and giving each other a hard time, and just, I don't know, it was just a really, really good day. And I had to get up early the next morning, and so later that night, I told him good night. I said, he goes, "Don't worry, I'll be in there in a minute, and we can watch the TV." And so it was about 9 o'clock that night. He comes in, goes to the bathroom. He's complaining of like the diaphragm area, right below the lungs, just hurting. And I said, "Well, do you need to go to the doctor?" He goes, "No, no, no." He goes, "I'll be okay. I don't know." He goes, "I don't know what's wrong." Comes out of the bathroom and sort of, how kids stand at the bed and then they flop halfway over at the waist, laying on the bed. He does that, and he's not crying, but he's moaning. And he goes, "Hon," he goes, "I don't know what's wrong." He goes, I've just never hurt like this. I've never hurt like this before." And he's rubbing that area. And our room's not very big, so none of this is probably like maybe a 2-minute conversation, all of what I'm about to tell you. I said, "Okay, come over here. We can put a heating pad on it. Maybe you can get relaxed with the heating pad." And like I said, all this is within just a minute or two. He walks around the bed, sits on the bed for a minute, slings his legs over, sits directly back up. He goes, and he's sort of bent over. And I said, "Hold on, let me turn the light on." And I hear a thump. And I turn around real fast, and he's sitting down on the floor like he slid off the bed. And I said, and he's sort of trying to grab at the trash can. I'm like, "Are you about to throw up?" And he's not responding. He's just shaking his head. And so I'm like, "Okay, you're not about to throw up." And so I'm like, "Hold on," and literally turn around again, turn back around, and he's on his side on the floor. And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." I say, and I'm at the foot of the bed. I'm like, "Get up, come on, let's get you up and let's figure out what's going on." And he doesn't respond. He just starts making this noise. I'm like, "What in the world?" Like he's sleeping. And I'm like, "Surely you can't fall asleep that quick." And I go over and I'm like shaking him because his eyes are sort of open. I'm like shaking him, and he's laying on his side. And I just so happen to look down, and he's not breathing. And I'm like, "Oh, heck no." And I shake him really hard, start screaming at him, and he makes that noise even louder. And then I realize his eyes are fixed. And I'm like, "Oh," and I get mad. I'm like, "You're not leaving me yet." And I slap him. I'm like, "Wake up." And then I would scream at Jess, because at this time I'm like, can't remember what I did with my phone. And I said, she comes running in there. I'm like, "Find my phone." I said, "Call 911. And he, like I said before, he's not the kind of person that likes anybody making a fuss over it. And I see blood coming out of his mouth, and I try to get his mouth open. His mouth's locked up, and throw up. I can smell like stomach acid, and I can't get his mouth open up, and I know he's dying. And she calls 911, and I'm on the phone with them, and I'm like, and they go, "Feel for a heart rate." And he has no heart rate. He has no heartbeat. I'm like, "Oh God." And this whole time I'm just in shock. I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. No, absolutely not." And they tell me to start compressions. And seems like forever before 911 shows up. The whole time I'm on the phone, the operator's trying to get my attention, or keep my attention, I should say, and I'm praying, screaming at God not to take him. I said, you gave him back to me. Excuse my language, but why the hell are you taking him now? And I'm doing compressions on my husband. Knowing good and well that most likely he died the moment he hit the ground. Because he had no heart rate, he wasn't breathing. His eyes weren't responding. 911 comes in, and there's so many of them in our small apartment. And the cops get me out of there. And this was about 9:15 by this time. And there's so many of them that came in. I just remember they were like, wow, there's so many of y'all. And there's like 5 cops standing in my living room with us. And they're like, what happened? And I told them. And I remember just saying, I tried to save him. Tried to save him. And I could hear through the door talking about that adrenaline stuff that, they try to get people's heart rate back. And I could hear the shocks going off over and over again. And they get the last count I hear of the adrenaline. They were up to like 10 or 11 shots of it. And it gets later and later and later. And I know enough to know that they don't move people unless they can, And about 10:15, I think, 10:15, they finally pull him out, take him up the stairs because we live in one of those 3-story things and we're at the bottom. I come around with this, I guess she was the lead EMT or something for the scene, and she goes, we might life flight him to Greenville, we're just not sure yet. But never would tell me no details of like what the decision, like what would make them decide one way or the other.
Yeah.
They go, we got a life flight ready just in case. I'm like, you do what you got to do. And we circle the corner and look up, and this person's on top of him doing compressions. They lost him. A little bit of time it took. They lost him at the top of the stairs, and they get him back, I guess, because they start going again. And 2 ambulance full of EMTs are in back of one. Couldn't even get him out of the parking lot. And I'm standing there, and strangers, my neighbors that I don't know, are standing there watching all this unfold. And I'm standing there at 10:15 at night in my pajamas outside in front of all these people, don't even care, watching through the little glass, strangers working on my husband. And she finally comes out and says, we're taking him to Coney, which is right around the corner. And I said, okay. I said, you let them know that I'm on my way. I said, y'all do what you got to do to save him. And I run downstairs with my daughter. We're still in pajamas, and grab what I need, speed out of there, get up up to the hospital. And they go, tell them who we are, and they just look at me and they go, you need to sit down. And I scream at them, and I hate yelling at them because I know that they don't need that. And I go, you mean to tell me you're going to make me sit when my husband could be dying? I said, how dare you? They go, ma'am, you need to sit. And this lady comes out a few minutes later and goes, Miss Barrios, you need to come back here. Come with me. And she introduces herself. Forget what her name was, but she goes, I'm the charge nurse. And I'm like, oh, great. Because, I know enough to know that it's never good when the charge nurse is involved.
Yeah.
And she leads me into this room, and I'm expecting before the door opens to see him on a ventilator. And I know that's not what he wanted, because he's very adamant after that experience, with COVID, that he'd never wanted to be back on one.
Yeah.
But that's what I expected. I expected a ventilator. No one was in the room. And she goes, you all need to sit here. The doctor that helped your husband will be here in a minute. And I told Jess, I said, don't get up. I said, I don't know what they're going to tell us. I said, but I don't want you moving. I said, don't get up. And I'm like, I could tell that I was in complete denial. Part of me sort of knew what they were going to tell me, but I was like, no, I'm going to see him on a vent, or they're going to say, well, he's already up in ICU on a ventilator. That's what I was hoping they would tell me. And and the door opens, and this guy in green comes walking in, and he goes, he just didn't look good. And I'm like, nope, you're not going to tell me what I think you're going to tell me. You're going to tell me he's on a ventilator. And he says the same thing as the EMTs. What happened? Tell him what happened. And he's like shaking his head, and the charge nurse is taking notes, I guess, doing something. And he goes, well, obviously you know what happened at your place, but this is what happened on the way here and when he got here. Before they could even get here, they lost the electrical activity in his heart. They got him back. By the time they pulled up, they lost it again. I'm sorry to tell you, but we couldn't get it. And I was so glad to be sitting down, because I felt like all the strength in my body left. And I'm like, and they said, I talked to the coroner, I talked to, I guess there was obviously more than one doctor on call, and we all agree that there was only, I think they said two things that could have happened: major heart attack or a blood clot, or both, basically. And I'm like, and I started asking him through the tears. I was like, well, what about this? What about that? Everything I heard, other long haulers going through. And he would say, no, it couldn't be. And he would explain it, like why it couldn't be that, And I'm like, it completely made sense. Everything made sense. I was like, okay, I get it. And I'm like, but hold on. I said, he was just up here a week ago, and you're going to rule it. He called it a massive widowmaker heart attack. And he actually said brought on by complications of long COVID.
Oh.
And I'm like, but that doesn't make no sense. I said, y'all did a stress test. Y'all did the pictures of the heart. Y'all did all this. I said, how in the world did he have a heart attack?
Yeah.
And he goes, and he explained why. He said that test can only pick up certain types of blockages, or certain percentage of blockages, or something. And at the time, it really made sense. And he goes, we think that what happened is your husband threw a clot, and it went into his heart, and he didn't survive it. And I'm like, okay. They go, do you want to see him? I said, of course I want to see him.
Yeah.
And they go, give us a little bit. We're getting ready. And when we opened the door to come out, like, a lot of the staff was just standing there at their little nurse's desk and just looking. And of course, walk in, and there he is, just laying there. And I grab his hand, and I'm like thinking, I literally thought, like, come on, wake up, enough's enough, wake up. And he was so cold. And I hugged Jess, and we said our goodbyes, and it was such a cold process with the staff, just no emotion, sign here, there you go, bye. Come to find out, I'm sure some of the staff up there would disagree with this, but Come to find out, they didn't offer any chaplain services. They didn't offer any like resources on what's next, and because of the fact that was changing jobs, I lost all life insurance on him. We lost everything when, he even had life insurance with that job and lost everything. And so I wasn't at the job that I was going to long enough to get life insurance on him. So we had to find a way to pay for him to be cremated because that's what he wanted. And find a way to pay for an urn because otherwise he would have came home in a box. And I couldn't do that for him. And it was the beginning, by this time it was the beginning of April. A church stepped up to help us pay for the urn. And my mom, who was also about to lose her husband had been suffering from cancer for a long time, stepped up and paid for his cremation. So we had both of those taken care of, but we had nowhere, to say goodbye, and the same place we renewed our vows, stepped up and said, "You're more than welcome to use our place again." The same lady that back in 2020 that married us or did our vow renewal eulogized him. Strangers came to his funeral to support us. None of them knew him. And then within 2 weeks, everybody's life went on.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's been almost 5 months since he died. And it still seems like Jess and I was actually just talking about it, how hard it is to watch everybody's life just go on like dad, like their dad didn't exist. That's the hardest part, I think, of grief, is even if you know people that's lost people, it's still, their life goes on too, and you're stuck with your sadness. The promises of, "Oh, if you need anything, please reach out," stop. The promises of, "Oh, I'll check in on you," stop.
Mm-hmm.
And days keep coming, the weeks keep coming, and that's the hardest part we find. So, but anyway, that's our story.
Oh, Summer, that just I'm all with my Kleenex and I know you mentioned that you did some public speaking and that your husband wanted you to tell his story.
Yeah. Well, I believe it was in October of 2020, Jessica and I teamed up with quite a few other people around the state, along with COVID Survivors for Change and Yellow Heart Memorial. Both are national organizations that fight for both long haulers as well as the victims of COVID, to honor them.
Yeah.
And we stood in front of the State House in Columbia with people at that time. Obviously, he was still alive. And we were basically, I believe we were the only ones that still had someone alive. Everybody else had lost someone. And we stood in front of, I can't remember how many empty chairs, and shared our stories. And I asked him, I said, "Do you want to come?" And he goes, "No." He goes, I can't do it." He goes, "I can't share my story." He goes, "It's too hard to relive." He goes, "But I want." He goes, I need you and I want you to share my story because I know it will make a difference. And I think he really meant that. You know, he knew that the community wasn't listening, you know, the medical and the political community wasn't listening. You know, he saw when Trump stood on the balcony at the White House and ripped his mask off. He saw our leaders, our state leaders, just brush long COVID under the rug like they're still doing. He saw our national leaders doing the same thing. And he also saw how disrespectful they were on both the state and national level of forgetting the victims of COVID.
Yeah.
And that upset him so much that the people he once supported politically were now either flaunting their arrogance at ignoring the seriousness of COVID, or that they were forgetting the victims of COVID. And I have to believe that he would still want people to listen about how serious not only COVID is, but how serious long COVID could be.
Yeah.
And how even if you survive long COVID and you don't end up like him, people still need help. They don't need to be choosing between working and treatment. And there needs to be, especially here in South Carolina, there needs to be more research, more funding, more clinics that are legitimate long COVID clinics, not just physical therapy places posing as a long COVID clinic, but like real funding. I've heard stories from all over, including the UK and other places where this it's not just a United States thing, it's a world thing where people are being gaslit into believing it's just a mental health issue. It's not.
Yeah.
Funding and help needs to be given to long haulers.
Yes, I completely agree. So, with regards to long haul, what is something like when people are in seeing a specialist and they're told, like you and your husband were, to wait and see, what would you say to them about pressing forward?
My advice to any long hauler, no matter how serious your battle with COVID was, is to not give up. Don't give up. We need your voice. People like me and my husband need your voice. And yes, he is no longer on this earth, but his story still lives. And we need to rally together and force the political and the medical community to listen, because otherwise more and more people are going to pass away from these complications of long COVID. And more people, you know, I've even spoken to somebody that lost his wife to suicide because she was a long hauler. She's, from what he told me, you know, she saw herself as a burden because she was so sick. That is sad that somebody was pushed to that point that they saw no other way out.
Yeah.
No long hauler, nobody should ever feel like that, no matter if they're a long hauler or not. I'm just asking the long COVID community to stand with me and to share their story at every opportunity they can, no matter how many people don't want to believe it.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we need, is to come together and make our voice known for the long haul community before more people commit suicide or die from complications. There's no need for any more needless deaths in this country or the world.
Are you a part of any long COVID support groups or action groups, like political action groups?
I'm still a member working with COVID Survivors for Change, as well as Yellow Heart Memorial. Yellow Heart Memorial is actually, I mean, they've been honoring COVID, victims of COVID that died directly from COVID for a long time now, but they're also getting into advocating for long haulers. And they are actually having temporary memorials up all over the country, as well as I believe they've actually went international now. So their movement is gaining ground. They've also been advocating for permanent memorials and actually gotten a few permanent memorials here in the US.
Yeah. And you did the March to Remember. Is that what it was called? The March?
We ended up, my daughter was sick on the day that happened. So we ended up doing there was signups for like independent marches.
Mm-hmm.
We actually just walked in honor of him by ourselves because of her health. But yes, there was many satellite walks all over the country, as well as the Brooklyn March that honored people that passed from COVID. And I know from what I'm understanding, there's supposed to be another one next August in DC this time around.
Oh, wow. That will be amazing.
That would be. Yeah.
Right to where it needs to go.
Exactly.
I mean, I love Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Bridge idea, but take it right there
I
to the
agree.
Capitol where they can see. Yeah. Yeah. I do have one last question that I ask everybody. And it is, what do you say to people who tell you COVID isn't real?
My goodness, we definitely heard that, especially back in 2020, because our story was shared on Fox Carolina, as well as People Magazine and ABC and various other places that year. People told us that a lot through social media. And even when he died, his death made Fox Carolina, and people automatically assumed it was something political, or he just dropped dead of vaccination status or whatever. And I can assure you that COVID is very real, still is very real. No matter if anyone wants to believe it, people are still dying. People are still going to become long haulers. I don't understand what more proof do you need to prove that COVID is something to be taken seriously. People walking around, not taking it seriously, no matter if they're vaccinated or not, you could still get COVID, because I saw it on my COVID board, the status of, vaccinated and boosted up there. And not all of them just left our floor. Some of them did go down to ICU. So I know for a fact, I've seen it personally, I've seen it professionally, that COVID is very real. It still is very real. Just because you're vaccinated doesn't mean you're not going to end up like my husband, in the ICU ward. And if you're unlucky, there'll be more deaths, and there'll be more complications. There'll be quite a bit more long haulers. I tell Jess this all the time: the new pandemic is the long COVID. But what's sad is that everybody is too much in a rush to ignore it.
Yeah.
The new pandemic is long COVID.
Yeah, it's going to be a long fight for a lot of people, millions of people just in the United States, but in the world, it is going to be a long fight for people to get that recognized and get the help that they need to be able to be on disability, and to have it be something that's treated without a doctor just brushing it off and saying,
Exactly,
wait.
I agree. But that's where, more organizations and people that are more fortunate than me need to help people like me share their stories. People, I know I'm a big Marvel fan, and there's this saying, and I'm sure it's elsewhere too, but it just pops into my head, the Spider-Man quote where the old man's saying, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
I strongly believe that if you're blessed with a platform such as yours, or if you're a videographer or a filmmaker or something, or somebody has a nonprofit, or if you are in political power, use your platform to listen. Open your ears and put aside look at the research. For one, Look at people's stories like mine and open your ears and your eyes and listen to people's stories and side with us and take it to Washington, take it to South Carolina State House, take it to all the other states, and make your colleagues listen, make people listen, help us share our story.
Yeah. Yeah, and do what you're doing right now, which is sharing your story and your husband's story.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what was his full name?
Robert Barrios.
And what day in March did he pass away?
The 22nd.
Thank you, Summer.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah, I so appreciate you taking the time to tell this story from pretty much the beginning of 2020 till now.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.